sensed they were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down to the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved." So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. Just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. For the last 14 days, he said, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head. After he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. Then he broke it and began to eat. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of us on board. When they had eaten so much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. When daylight came, they did not recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach, where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea, and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach. But the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. The bow stuck fast and would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out the plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or on pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. This, my friends, is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The Bible has so much to tell us, doesn't it? Our scripture is from the book of Acts, and it's written by the same person who wrote the Gospel of Luke. In this book, we get a glimpse of what the early church looked like as it began to evolve and shape itself outside and beyond Jerusalem. But most of the book in today's reading is about Paul. So let's just touch on Paul for a minute. So even though we refer to Paul as the Apostle Paul, he's not one of the 12 disciples that Jesus picked. Paul, his former name was Saul. He was a very strict religious Pharisee, and he despised the early Christian church. So much so that he asked the religious authorities if he could start looking for these Christian troublemakers and bring them back in chains to Jerusalem so that justice could be served. But on one of his bounty hunting expeditions, he was on his way to Damascus, and he has this experience with the risen Lord. There's a bright light, and he's knocked off of his horse, and he's blinded. I don't know, do you remember these words from Jesus? Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Well, Saul has this huge conversion, and he ends up switching sides, and he becomes a Christian missionary. And then his name is changed at that time to Paul. But life for Paul wasn't a bed of roses. Along his journeys, he butts heads with the Jewish leaders and also with local authorities, and eventually he's arrested. So now Paul is in chains. And as our story begins, he's on his way to Rome to appeal his conviction to the emperor. Caesar. And as the ship is sailing to get there, a huge gale comes up, and it just pounds the ship for days, throwing it off course, and the lives of everyone on board are in jeopardy. And in our reading this morning, it doesn't look very good for those on board, does it? Unexpected gale winds and violent storms, being thrown off course, holding on to anything that would keep them from drowning. And this ship, which is their only means of getting anywhere, is now stuck in the mud, and the waves begin to tear it apart. These men have been thrown into a terrible and life-threatening disaster, not of their own choosing. Does this situation have parts of it that might remind you of things going on in society today? Maybe in the last 3 months or so? A terrible and life-threatening disaster, not of our own choosing. The coronavirus sure has made an impact on our lives, hasn't it? Stay-at-home orders, restaurants closed, businesses, schools, and even churches. Who would have thought that Amity Presbyterian Church would lock its doors for this amount of time? It'd be interesting to do some research on this relative to our church's 146-year history and just find out if we've ever had church canceled for such a long period of time. Even today, many other churches are still struggling with all this happened. And the irony of it all for churches out there today is we're supposed to be trying to bring people in, and now they're trying to limit the amount of people that come in, and maybe even keep some people out who want to be there. The coronavirus, too, has brought on a lot of new terminology. Social distancing. The new normal. COVID-19. I'm still trying to figure out what happened to COVID 1 through 18. I don't really think I want to know either. Flatten the curve. And after all the snacks I've had in the last 3 months, that really relates directly to me. And I still haven't figured out the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic. Some people have shortened the word coronavirus to just like the word Rona. So if you used it in a sentence, it would be like, the kids are driving me crazy because of the Rona. And lastly, we have virtual happy hours and Zoom bombing. Life certainly has changed, hasn't it? As I was reading and studying these words from Acts, the thought that kept coming back to me was, how could Paul be in this situation and be so calm? Here we have Paul. He's in a ship in the middle of the sea. The gale winds hit. All the lives are in danger. Paul has every reason to panic and every reason to be afraid. But that's not mentioned at all. He should be stressed out. I know I would be. First of all, he's with a bunch of criminals. Most likely he's chained together with them and they're all in the hull of the ship. The sailors are lost and they're traveling in waters that they don't know about. They hadn't eaten in 14 days. I get cranky if I haven't had a snack in 2 hours. And the sailors, they're the ones actually navigating the ship. And they're critical to everyone getting out of the situation. And what do? They sneak down and try to take the lifeboat and leave. And the Roman soldiers, they're probably carrying swords and spears, and they're just looking for an opportunity to kill a prisoner who's trying to escape. And we need to remember, Paul, he's one of those prisoners. Could it get any more difficult? And through it all, Paul stays calm. And as a result, Paul seems to be the one calling the shots. And all 276 men on board are saved from this very difficult situation. How do we deal with difficult situations? How do we stay calm? Hard to be calm in a pandemic, isn't it? There's fear of the unknown. We don't know what to believe or who to believe. How about being short-tempered and anxious? Have you felt a level of stress that maybe you never had before? Barb and I have two close friends whose mothers are in nursing homes and their health is deteriorating. We keep hearing that things aren't going to get any better. How hard would that be? Some of us want things to go back the way they were. And then people keep telling us that'll never happen. I was at Giant Eagle a couple of weeks ago and I walked down one of the aisles opposite the arrow that was on the floor. And a lady came by and she looked at me like I had robbed a bank. I was just getting some olives. That's all I was there for. Even spending that quality time with family, parents, kids, grandkids. It was probably fine at first, right? But after a few weeks, schools are closed. People are working from home. And this could create a situation that may not be as ideal as what it sounded like. Each of us is in a different place where all this is going. And much of it is stressful. And I think it's anything but calm. We need to remind ourselves that the scriptures look at being calm as a good thing. Look at Paul on the ship. Maybe he gets his examples from Jesus, who calmed a few storms himself. Back in May, I had to get paint at Home Depot. And I knew I'd have to wear a mask, and I knew I'd probably have to stand in line, but, a little inconvenience, I was fine with that. Well, I was in the paint section, and I was looking for some primer, and I heard a loud voice at that counter, where they mix the paint. And this voice kept getting louder and louder. And so I went up the aisle to see what was going on. And there was a customer standing there, and he did not look very happy. You see, the person who was mixing the paint told the customer that he couldn't wait on him because he wasn't wearing a mask. Well, the guy must have really needed paint because he went off on this verbal tirade. He not only gave the guy mixing the paint a lesson in politics, but also in legal and medical aspects of epidemic emergencies. He went on and on. His face was red, and now other customers are turning to see what's going on. The Home Depot paint guy, you could just feel that all he wanted to do was just let this guy go. Get him out of here. I thought for sure the police were going to be coming. And then the customer began to scream certain words that you wouldn't say in mixed company, or you wouldn't say within a mile of a church. Words that make a Marine blush. Some words were used, I didn't even know what they meant. The opposite of being calm. How did Paul keep it all together? How was he able to stay so calm during this situation? I believe the reason is that he stayed focused. Focused on the thing that mattered the most to him in life. And that thing was his relationship with Christ. Paul knew that his priority had to be doing the work of Jesus, and to share the good news of the gospel to anyone who would listen. He needed to reach as many souls as he could, and he was constantly looking for opportunities to do that. He even came to develop a relationship with the centurion, and it was that relationship that actually allowed him and the other prisoners to live in this situation. Paul was on a ship to Rome to appeal his criminal case to Caesar himself, and he was focused on getting there and trusting, fully trusting in whatever situation came to him on his journey. He trusted that God would be faithful. He focused 100% on that. And we need to do the same as well. Trust that God will be faithful in all things. Chesley Sullenberger was born in Denison, Texas in 1951. As a child, he loved to build model airplanes. And because he lived near a military base, he could see planes take off all the time. He ended up being a fighter pilot in the United States Air Force. And then in 1980, he left and he became a commercial pilot. He was also an active member of the Waples Memorial United Methodist Church, also in Denison. On January 15th, 2009, U.S. Airways Flight 1549, which is an Airbus 320, lifted off from LaGuardia Airport in New York City. The captain was now 57-year-old Sullenberger, also known as Sully. He had under his belt over 19,000 hours of flying time and 4,700 hours of flying the A320. There were 150 passengers on board, 3 flight attendants, and his co-pilot. And at 3:27 p.m., when he was about 5 miles northwest of the airport, an unexpected flock of geese struck the plane. The crew and the passengers heard the banging, and they saw fire coming out of the engines. And then both engines shut down. Sully took manual control of the plane, but it still continued to fly for another 19 seconds. It was still going at 213 miles an hour when Sully turned the plane around. He immediately called a mayday into the air traffic controllers. They directed him back to the airport for an emergency landing on runway 13. Sully responded with one word: unable. He then asked controllers for another landing spot. No good either. And then Sully told them that they were going to be in the Hudson. And then he told the passengers and crew to brace for impact. I think most of us know the rest of the story. The water landing of this powerless jetliner came to be known as the Miracle on the Hudson. And all 155 passengers were rescued. The National Transportation Board officials said that it was the most successful ditching of a plane in aviation history. And all this occurred within 90 seconds. After all the passengers had exited the plane, Sully made 2 sweeps in knee-deep water through the plane to make sure that all the passengers and crew were out. And Sully was the last person to leave the plane. He was later described by friends as being shy and reticent, and was noted for his poise during the crisis. The mayor of New York City dubbed him Captain Cool. I like to describe him as calm and focused. You know, most likely none of us would be in a situation like the Apostle Paul or like Sullenberger, where hundreds of lives are at stake as a result of our actions. But I believe that being calm and focused is something that can help us get through this crazy life that we live in. As the days and weeks and years go by, we're going to find ourselves in difficult situations, without a doubt. Health issues, financial issues, maybe issues with relationships. There will be something that's going to come our way. And when these hardships come our way, we need to deal with them. And the best way is to stay calm and focused. Focus on our priorities, our spouses, our kids, our families, and most important, our relationship with God. That's what Paul did. He did it all for Jesus Christ. You know, Paul finally did make it to Rome. He was there for a few years, and then finally, Rome got tired of his talk and rhetoric, and he was martyred there. But all through his life, after his experience on that road to Damascus, he stayed focused on the prize. Life in heaven with the Father for all eternity. May it be so for us as well.